Again, want to thank everyone. My name is Hedrick Beelan, and I'm the CEO of Potomac Conservancy. And just it's great, as we've been saying, as people have been buzzing in, just to see so many of our leading supporters and friends on the call tonight. Want to thank each and every one of you for all the different ways that you help and support both the river and the Conservancy. And just as important, we really appreciate you deciding to spend an hour with us tonight, hearing a little bit about the Potomac Gorge, which is such an amazing treasure. I've certainly had opportunities, as many of you have, to be out a lot on in the gorge, along the gorge. But every time there's something new and different to experience, and I think that's going to be true of the talk tonight as well. So with that, I turn it over to our Vice President of Development, Mary Voss, and then Melanie.
Well, thank you and welcome. We're thrilled to have Melanie Choukas-Bradley with us this evening. Acclaimed naturalist, author of 7 books, soon to be another book, and extraordinarily gifted in sharing the wonders of our natural world here in the region. The Potomac is one of her sweet spots, and we're so glad that she can share it with us. We're going to be hearing about the Potomac Gorge, subject of study and of a future writing as well. But I just want to frame this in Melanie's gift for communicating about nature. She's also a Smithsonian Associates event leader and one of our local guides in forest bathing, which, if you don't know about that, you can also read her book about it. So we're thrilled to have this opportunity to share. This is called Experience Your Potomac, which is something that Potomac Conservancy shares with our leadership supporters and very good friends once, sometimes twice a year. It's just an opportunity to learn about the river and the things that we treasure in our local environment. I will be helping to coordinate this chat with Melissa Rodriguez, who I believe is ready to start our slides. If you're going to interact and share, ask questions, please do ask them in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat and feeding those questions in as we're able to towards the end. And just as a note to everyone, we are recording because so many people have requested a recording of tonight's session. So we're doing that to share with others later. So with that, I'd love to introduce Melanie and get us started. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Hedrick and Mary. I am beyond honored to be with you. And I know we have so many people here with us tonight who are dedicated and distinguished stewards of our precious Potomac River watershed. And I want to thank you all for your tireless commitment to protecting this treasure. I'm going to take you on a little journey through the gorge and through the seasons. And it won't be a complete tour because the gorge is filled with all kinds of secrets. And I will just take you to some of my favorite places that I've discovered, especially during the past year. So here is Great Falls, which is at the top of the Potomac Gorge, with a lovely winter mist rising from it, which we so often see. And then in the lower right is sycamore, one of the giant sycamores that grows along our Potomac River. And that's along the river trail, which is just up river from Great Falls on the Maryland side. Slide. That's my little slide change signal. Yay. We had some tech challenges earlier, as those of you who joined us earlier know. So I just want to tell you a little bit about my background and where I'm coming from in this Potomac Gorge project. So I moved to Washington when I was in my 20s, when my husband started law school. I had been the news director for a radio station in New Hampshire, and I just kind of thought I would breeze into town and become the next Connie Chung. Well, that did not happen. What happened instead is that while I wasn't finding my dream job, I fell in love with the trees. And my husband, Jim, and I were living on Capitol Hill, and the Capitol grounds, which are designed by Frederick Law Olmsted have incredible trees around them. And then the whole city of Washington, which has been known as the city of trees for many decades, is incredibly but botanically diverse. And the history of these trees is just woven into the fabric of life here. So I wanted to learn about those trees. And when I found out there was no book about them, I got the idea to write one myself. Slide. Oh, I'm supposed to say slide, not hold up my finger. Sorry, wrong cue. The first book that I wrote, which was published when I was in my 20s, is City of Trees. My friend Polly Alexander, who had graduated from the University of Vermont with me, and she is an artist and had a botany degree. And I lured her down from Vermont to Washington to work on this book, City of Trees. It came out over 40 years ago, and it has been in continuous print ever since. And then all of my other nature books that you see here, they're all focused on nature in the Washington, D.C. area. And when I've worked on these books, I've had incredible collaborations with artists and photographers. And I'd like to mention a couple of them who are with us tonight. Tina Theme Brown not only illustrated the two books about Sugarloaf Mountain there at the top in the middle, but she and I researched those books together for 10 years. And it was a wonderful labor of love. And then Tina also illustrated the Theodore Roosevelt Island book, which is my most recent book down in the lower right-hand corner. Susan Austin Roth, and you will get to see many of her beautiful photos tonight. She is the photographer for A Year in Rock Creek Park. And she also has photos on the covers of two of the other books, City of Trees and Resilience, Connecting with Nature in a Time of Crisis. I love working with talented people. And also I want to say in the Washington area, I think something a lot of people don't know about our city is the generous collaborative spirit of people working here. All the people that I worked with, the botanists, the geologists, the historians, were so generous in sharing their nature, their knowledge. And I think probably many of us here tonight have had that experience as well. Next slide. Slide. So in addition to writing about nature, I love leading field trips and forest bathing walks, most of them local. I do lead trips to the Badlands of North Dakota, but most of my trips are right in the Washington area. I'm leading some walks at Theodore Roosevelt Island in the spring and also at Turkey Run and in Rock Creek Park. And these pictures here were taken on Theodore Roosevelt Island. I love being out in nature with people who not only want to learn about the trees and the birds and the ecology and history, but also want to just share those moments of awe when you are so inspired by something you experience collectively, that you have this collective experience of awe. I also love going into the gorge alone. I cherish my solo time in nature, but I love being out with people who truly appreciate it. Slide. So I think it's so fun that the City of Trees, the original plan of it, looks like a tree. There's our beautiful Potomac River on the left and our beautiful Anacostia River coming in from the east. And there's the city, which is the crown of the tree. Slide. Okay, the Potomac Gorge. What is the Potomac Gorge? So I have found out, two of my books are like year-long nature memoirs, the Rock Creek Park and the Theodore Roosevelt Island book. And that is what this book project will be. I have kept my year of record was 2022. So I'm going to be sharing a lot of experiences I had during the past year. I didn't really know what the Potomac Gorge was. When I was working on the book about the Theodore Roosevelt Island, I learned that was considered the southern bottom end of the gorge. And then I wondered, well, what's the rest of the gorge? And of course, it starts up at Great Falls. It goes for 15 miles. It's 15 miles of dramatic river that takes the Potomac from the rocky Piedmont Plateau down to the flat coastal plain. It's a dramatic drop. Once you're aware of the gorge, you're aware it's a gorge. it's a whole gorge. And so my little mission, I found out that most people don't know what the Potomac Gorge is. When I ask them about the gorge, they will refer usually to the Mather Gorge, which is the narrow gorge right below Great Falls, but not to appreciate the gorge as a whole. And I think once you do, you appreciate all the parkland and all of the amazing aspects of the Potomac Gorge. Now you look at this map. This is a beautiful map that was done for the Nature Conservancy by Mary Belcher. It's a handout that you can get that they give out at the Visitor Center. And this tells the story on the back: National Park Service, the Nature Conservancy, and the Potomac Conservancy. I love this map. You will see there is national parkland on both sides of the gorge, running all the way down the gorge. And then there are wonderful county parks in Montgomery County, in Fairfax County, and in Arlington County. And then in DC, there are national parks in DC as well. The towpath and the C&O Canal run all along the Maryland side. The Potomac Heritage Trail runs along the Virginia side. And I'm going to take you to a lot of spots along the way. Slide. The Potomac Gorge, now a lot of it, I think about half of it, and you would know, Hedrick and Mary, better than I, is national parkland. And it's considered, in the national park system, it is considered one of the most biodiverse places in the national park system. There are a lot of reasons for that, but the main reason for it is the absolute force of the Potomac River. This river, which is 383 miles long, starts up on the Allegheny Plateau, comes down in, through the mountains and to the Piedmont. It brings seeds from far away. So we have a lot of rare plants for our area that grow here. Also, because of the force of the river, we have these amazing rare habitats that are formed by the periodic flooding. And we're also like on the border of the Piedmont and the coastal plain, the north and the south. So we just have incredible diversity in plants and animals. Slide. And, I really want to learn more about Native American habitation of the gorge. It goes back 13,000 years. Native American tribes began coming here, and the resources were just fantastic for fishing and the animals and the plants. And I gather that early on they were somewhat nomadic, and then of course many Native Americans settled in villages and farmed along the Anacostia and Potomac rivers. Members of the Nacotchtank tribe were actually on Theodore Roosevelt Island until the early 18th century. Next slide. And this is Doug Dupin. He is the caretaker of Sycamore Island. I'm going to tell you about how I first came to Sycamore Island a little bit later on. This is a private club. It's a privately owned island. The club goes back to 1885, and you can see Doug is pulling this hand-operated ferry. You just go hand over hand to go from the towpath to the island. And he is an archaeologist and has a real passion for it. He actually found some of these artifacts when he was digging a wine cellar at his home in the Palisades in the 1990s. These rock points here go back hundreds, maybe thousands of years. They were used, as Doug explained to me, they were used for all kinds of things, not just as spear points, but to cut and do all the things that you do in life. He is hoping to open up an exhibit in the Conduit Road Schoolhouse in Battery Kemble Park, which is one of the DC parks that goes into the gorge. Slide. And he told me about these petroglyphs in the gorge. I shared an article with Mary and Melissa earlier today about it in the Washington Post about the petroglyphs here on the right. Petroglyphs are very rare in the mid-Atlantic area. And these are probably hundreds of years old. I don't think they can really be dated. I haven't found the fish head there on the left. I haven't found that yet. Apparently it's near Great Falls. I'm probably someone here knows where it is. The small petroglyphs that are outlined in yellow, those are on a rock wall at Difficult Run. And with Doug's instructions, my friend Linda Rubenstein actually found them recently. They've been spray painted. I didn't want to show you the picture because I was afraid it would be too upsetting to see that somebody spray painted over them, but actually it's easier to find them with the spray paint. Next slide. So, you know, I was saying that most people don't know what the Potomac Gorge is as a whole, but almost everyone in our area, and even people who visited from all around the country and the world, know the towpath, the canal and the towpath, and the iconic Great Falls Tavern. Next slide. And here is the towpath with the canal boat that I guess you can still get on that boat and experience going through the locks and experience a little bit of what it was like back in the day. And so a lot of people, I think that's probably the most familiar touch point in the gorge is the towpath and the C&O Canal. And the towpath is 184.5 miles long. It goes all the way to Cumberland, Maryland. And I think a lot of people are also familiar with Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas's famous walk in the 1950s when he took Washington Post editors on a walk from Cumberland to Georgetown to show them how important it was to preserve this towpath and canal because there was a highway project that was threatened. So it's a wonderful story. Next slide. So I am from Vermont. I'm jealous of my family members who are, you know, in a winter wonderland in Vermont and New Hampshire. But I love the gorge in the winter. I feel like you can really feel the bones of the gorge in the winter. You can experience the rocks. And one of the most beautiful sights are the sycamore trees, the whitened sycamore trees along both banks of the river. And another name for this American sycamore is ghost tree. And I always think of them as ghost trees in the winter. When the spring and summer comes, they'll be obscured by foliage, but right now they are the ghost trees. Next slide. And here they are. I took this picture a few days ago from the Old Anglers boat launch at dawn. And I watched as the sun rose, it shone on the crowns of those sycamore trees, and then the light went down the trees and the trees lit up from top to bottom. It was really wonderful. Next slide. And here's a beautiful sycamore tree at dawn on Bear Island next to the Billy Goat Trail. The little hanging balls that you see on the left, those are tight clusters of fruits. And when I say fruit, they're dry fruits. They're little tiny single-seeded fruits called achenes, and they're packed into these tight balls. Now, birds break them up during the winter, and then in the spring, they break up, and when they break apart, if you find one lying in the towpath, be sure to pick it up and hold it in your hand, because each one of those little tiny fruits is attached to these soft, tawny hairs. And the hairs open into a little parachute that allows them to float down the river, to fly and then float down the river. It's just amazing. When you think about the ways that plants attract pollinators and spread their seeds, it's just beyond amazing. Next slide. Okay, so I'm trying to wrap my head around the geology. I've spent 2 days in the gorge with geologists. And the geology of the gorge is so complex, and it will take me the rest of my life to wrap my head around it. This is a field trip that I was on in January, and I think some other people with us tonight were also on that field trip, Tina Themy Brown and Sharon Forsyth, led by Joe Marks. It was sponsored by Nature Forward, the former Audubon Naturalist Society. And Joe is standing next to a rock right before the footbridge to Olmsted Island. And that is Meta Greywacke is the name of that rock. It's a metamorphic rock. It's almost 500 million years old. It formed under the sea and the floor of the sea from, sediments, muddy sediments and sandy sediments at the base of the sea. So it's a really, really old rock. And there's another very old metamorphic rock called mica schist that's also there. So when you're right at Great Falls, most of the rocks you see are the metagraywacke and the mica schist. There are also other igneous rocks there, of course. But what's fascinating is that these rocks, which are almost 500 million years old, are cut through by the Potomac in a really geologically new way. The Great Falls, the current location of Great Falls is only about 35 or 37,000 years old. And then Mather Gorge right below it is even newer. So I find it fascinating that these extremely old rocks are part of a fairly new geologic formation. Next slide. And even though I don't understand everything about them geologically, I can certainly appreciate their beauty. And this is as Joe explained to me, this is almost kind of like a layer cake of both the metagraywacke and the mica schist. And the mica schist has little flecks of mica in it, and then the graywacke can look a little bit sugary on the surface. Next slide. So I'm sure many of you have had that experience of coming to Great Falls on the Maryland side, maybe bringing a few cares with you. And then once you step onto the footbridge to Olmsted Island, your cares just slip away. This is such a dramatic scene of the river rushing past Olmsted Island. And if you look at the way the trees are perched on those rocks, there are Virginia pines and eastern red cedars or junipers, there's American sycamore, there are oak trees. And when you see the way the roots are wrapped around those rocks, it's just incredible. Next slide. And this is the sign that welcomes you to Olmsted Island. And I will read what it says because I think it's kind of hard to see. The sign says, "You are entering a rare and fragile area, a bedrock terrace forest. Olmsted Island is one of the best preserved examples of this ecosystem. Help preserve this unique area. Stay on the boardwalk." Next slide. So this boardwalk, which was built in 1992, opened in 1992, goes through the bedrock terrace forest and takes you out to Great Falls. And this forest, it's a very rare habitat. Periodically flooding comes through and absolutely wipes out the woody plants. And that happened in 1972 with Hurricane Agnes. Almost all the woody plants were wiped out. But when those floods come, they also bring all kinds of nutrients and seeds from upriver that take hold. And the soil here is very thin. The trees are somewhat stunted. There are also depressions in the rock that hold water. So they're like mini habitats within this bedrock terrace forest. Next slide. And, when I look at that water and I think near-death experience, and then I look down and see someone in a kayak, it's really something. And I think watching the kayakers at Great Falls, especially in the winter, it seems more perilous and dramatic in the winter. They shoot right down the falls, and there he was right there on this wild day. Next slide. This is my favorite Virginia pine on the island in the bedrock terrace forest. It's a Virginia pine, and look at how it's just perched there on that rock outcrop. It's really wonderful. When you're walking on the boardwalk, it's on the left. There's kind of a turn in the boardwalk, and you'll see it right there commanding that spot on the left. Next slide. So the island is dedicated to Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., and I just want to say a little bit about the Olmsted family, especially their work in Washington. So Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. who designed Central Park, also designed the Capitol grounds, which are now known as the Capitol grounds and Arboretum. And he, of course, designed, he was considered the father of landscape architecture. He designed parks throughout the country. His son, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., really picked up where his father left off when he retired in the 1890s. And he was on the Macmillan Commission at the turn of the 20th century, the original Park and Planning Commission. He was very involved in the early days of planning Rock Creek Park. And he loved the gorge and wanted to preserve the land in the gorge. So it's wonderful that this island is dedicated to him. And it's really cool because this is at the top of the gorge. And then at the bottom of the gorge is Theodore Roosevelt Island, which was landscaped by Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. in the 1930s. And he directed the Civilian Conservation Corps to plant the forests that you see when you go there now in the uplands. Now, I want to mention a certain special person, Georgia Chafee-Nasikas, who is with us tonight. She is the vice chair of the Potomac Conservancy Board, and she is also the president of the Perennial Garden Club. And I understand that the Perennial Garden Club was inspired by the celebration of, last year was the 200th birthday of Frederick Law Olmsted Sr., and the Garden Club of America was doing all kinds of things to honor that. And what the Perennial Garden Club began as a project to do an intensive study of Olmsted Island and the gorge. They were studying the geology, the biology, the evolution of the island and the gorge. And they're going to be sharing in very creative ways. They will be sharing this information. And so stay tuned for that. That's really something to look forward to. Next slide. Okay, so these are the Rocky Islands, which are just below the Great Falls, and you often see black vultures perched up on those rocks. It's just great. I love black vultures. Next slide. Okay, so you already know I love winter. I'm totally snow deprived this year, but I've gotten used to it. And one of the things that got me through were my memories of last winter when we had all this wonderful snow. This was January 4th, which was the day after that big snowstorm that stranded all those people on I-95 south of Washington. You remember that? They were stranded for 24 hours. Well, to me, it was heaven. My husband has a truck, which he allowed me to drive that day. And so the next day, January 4th, I went to Carderock in the truck. Next slide. And Carderock is on the Maryland side. It's part of the national parkland next to the C&O Canal. So the C&O Canal and towpath are wonderful in the winter. You can see a cross-country skier got there before me. A few of them did, and I actually had to ski elsewhere at Carderock because they had really worn the snow down to the path. It's so beautiful in the wintertime, and every now and then the canal freezes up enough that we can skate on the canal. Next slide. So I went on this wonderful hike that day on the Billy Goat Trail Section C. I think most people know the Billy Goat Trail Section A, but there's also a Section B and a Section C that are not quite as challenging if you find the Billy Goat A a little too challenging. And look at this winter wonderland. Every twig was laced with snow. And then to cap it off, while I was walking through the woods and the sun was just coming through, a little flock of bluebirds came in and landed in a tree and shook the snow down on me like that in that Robert Frost poem. And you can see on the left the fox tracks. I saw those tracks and then I smelled the fox musk. Next slide. This is taken on that day, these beautiful rocks at Carderock. It's a famous rock climbing wall. Next slide. This is at the top of the climbing wall. Okay, now we're on the Virginia side of the river. And this is my friend, Betsy Lovejoy. I think she's with us tonight. And this picture was taken on her birthday in January of 2022. She is a twin. She has a twin sister. So she stood with this twin sycamore tree to celebrate her birthday and the birthday of her twin. Riverbend Park is a beautiful park. It's a Fairfax County park just above Great Falls. And it's a wonderful way to experience the falls. You walk along, there's a shallow dam. It's actually the water supply for the city of Washington. There's a shallow dam above Great Falls. This is just the most serene, peaceful area. And then as you walk down the river trail, you start to hear the roar of the falls. So it's very dramatic. And we love to go birding there, don't we, Betsy? Next slide. So I mentioned Mather Gorge. Mather Gorge is a narrow gorge just below Great Falls. And when you think about the fact that this river drains almost 15,000 square miles in 4 states, and up above Great Falls, the river is still 1,000 feet wide. And then after the falls, the river sluices through Mather Gorge, which is less than 100 feet wide. Next slide. And this is Mather Gorge from the river trail in Great Falls Park. This is one of my favorite trails anywhere. I mean, you can go out west, you can go to New England. This is dramatic beauty, absolutely dramatic. You're walking along the top of this gorge and you're looking down into it, and the trees are beautiful. You can see the Virginia pines there, the oak trees. Next slide. And I named this hollow tree that I found in Great Falls Park on this snowy day. I named it the Ark, and because it just made me feel like it was an ark. I guess it's kind of like a dugout canoe, actually, but I thought of it as being an ark that was going to set sail. And this brings up something that, I really think that the best way, the most meaningful way to connect with nature is when you connect with nature in your own backyard, when you get to know a place through all the seasons, through all kinds of weather, through the years. And if you name things, I love to name things. I name trees, I name rocks, I name this hollow log. That kind of gives you a personal connection. So that's just a little thing that I love to do. Next slide. This is Difficult Run. Now, Difficult Run is south of Great Falls. It's a dramatic tributary. The tributaries that flow into the gorge are every bit as exciting and dramatic as the gorge itself. They're like little mini Great Falls coming down on both the Virginia and the Maryland side. And this is Difficult Run. And you'll see those evergreen leaves. That's trailing arbutus plant, which is a fragrant flower that blooms in the early spring, and the leaf is evergreen, so you can see it all winter. Next slide. And I love meeting people on the trail. I have met so many people in the woods. In fact, most of the people I know I met in the woods. My husband and I were on a walk in January of 2022, and we met this dad and his children, and they were having so much fun at Difficult Run. You can see the child perched on the rock. There's nothing kids love more than climbing on rocks. Next slide. And the mouth of Difficult Run is so dramatic. It's dramatically beautiful and very pristine. And the stream got its name not from all the waterfalls and rapids, but for the treacherous waters at the mouth. When George Washington was trying to build his canal, his skirting canals and improve river navigation, the Potomac company that he formed they were working at Great Falls. In fact, you can still see the ruins there of Matildaville, the village they lived in. And you can see the remains of one of the skirting canals, maybe more than one. And they thought these waters were so treacherous, they gave it the name Difficult Run. Next slide. Well, we have had some cold weather. We have not had snow. We had a few flurries, but nothing amounted to anything. But Christmas Day was very cold. I talked my family into going to Turkey Run Park that day, and there had been a heavy rain beforehand. So there were all these fanciful things froze up all of a sudden, and there were all these fanciful ice formations. On the right, it looks like a Christmas ornament hanging down. And then the formations on the left, my daughter gave them the name octopuses. She called them octopuses because they look like octopuses with their tentacles. And that was along the Potomac Heritage Trail in Turkey Run Park. Next slide. And here's my crew. We're along Turkey Run, and you can see it's frozen, and it was booming. Every few minutes, it would let out some, loud booming sound with the cracking ice. It was very exciting. Next slide. And this is a beautiful river birch that is right along the Potomac Heritage Trail on the in Turkey Run. And the Potomac Heritage Trail is very different from the towpath. The towpath is this very level, reliable path. The Potomac Heritage Trail is an adventure with lots of rock scrambling, lots of rock and root scrambling, and you lose the trail and you pick it up again, and it's really wonderful. Next slide. And here's a bitternut hickory. We have several species of hickories in the gorge. And I love this is a magnificent tree at Turkey Run. And I love the bud. It's a mustard yellow bud. And in some lights, it looks like French's mustard. And on other lights, it looks like Goulden's mustard. I think it's more on the French's side there with the sun shining on it. Next slide. So, one of the best ways to experience the Potomac Gorge is to take this staircase that was built by the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club. It was dedicated last year. It was a 4-year project. It's the most beautifully engineered wooden staircase, and it starts up on the bluff above the river. I think it's parking lot C, and then you climb down these steps. And there is the whole gorge before you, and the drama of the rapids and the ghost trees on the other side of the river. And I see we have a message here from Jamie Raskin, who has to go back to the house floor. Jamie is, hi, Jamie. Is that
Hello,
Jamie?
Mel.
Hi, Jamie. I just want to thank you so much for being a steward of the Potomac River and also of our democracy. And I don't know if everyone knows this, but your district, District 8, is the Potomac Gorge District. It goes all along the gorge in Maryland. So thank you, Jamie. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all you do.
Well, Melanie, thank you. I know it now, like so many things I know because of you. I've been a child of Rock Creek Park since I was a little boy, but when I met Melanie Choukas-Bradley, I don't know, a decade ago or something, it opened my eyes. I felt like Monsieur Jourdain in Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme when he wakes up and he realizes he's been speaking in prose his whole life. He realized I'm surrounded by flora and fauna, and you've opened the whole world to me, Melanie Choukas-Bradley. So thanks for this great talk. Like everything you do, you are a wonder and a natural and human treasure for us.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you so much. And Jamie, I look forward to walking in the gorge with you. We've led so many walks together in Rock Creek Park. And we're going to walk in the gorge together, and it will be wonderful.
We'll go on the 8th District side, but we'll invite our Virginia friends to come along, and DC.
Absolutely.
Much love to you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye. So this staircase goes down to the Potomac Heritage Trail. And one of my favorite hikes is to go down the stairs and then go north on the Potomac Heritage Trail to Dead Run, which is, I don't know, maybe 1.5 miles upriver. I'm there in this picture, which was taken by Tina Themey Brown. Tina and Carol and I love to go on nature walks together. We don't cover too much ground because we stop and look at everything. Carol is she was the forest ecologist and botanist for all the Montgomery County park systems for many, many years. She is a legend and a treasure, and we are there enjoying those steps. And I just want to say the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club, they take care of so many of the trails in the gorge and in Rock Creek Park, and we are so grateful to them, and sing their praises and thank them when you make this climb into the gorge. Next slide. And this was our wonderful snowy, icy year. And there I am down there. You can see the river is frozen out. This is Scotts Run Nature Preserve. Scott's Run, Turkey Run is below the Beltway on the Virginia side. Scott's Run is above the Beltway on the Virginia side. Turkey Run is National Park. Scott's Run is Fairfax County Park. And it just shows this amazing patchwork of county and national park all through the gorge on both sides of the river. This was a beautiful day. Next slide. And that is Carol again on the right. And then there I am with my buddy, Tina Theme Brown. And you can see that that waterfall, Scott's Run waterfall, part of it is frozen. And Tina, as an artist, was noticing all these fractal patterns in the ice. It was a great day. It was Groundhog Day, 2022. Next slide. And we met these people on the trail. They were celebrating the birthday. You can see the birthday boy has a hat with the candles on his head. I just love the spontaneous meetings in our parks. And I love the fact that sometimes you can go out and have the woods all to yourself and have a wonderful solo experience. Other times you can hardly get a parking spot. There are so many people out, and I love both the solo and I love the collective enjoyment and appreciation of our parks. Next slide. And children, oh my gosh, they love the gorge. They love everything about it. And not just the little children, but also the adult children. These are my birding buddies. Tim Reed, some of my birding buddies. Tim Reed is climbing up the root ball of that incredible tree that came down in Turkey Run Park. And there's Betsy Lovejoy and Georgia Chafee Nasikas and Margaret Ratano, and we're all playing in the gorge. Next slide. So it is spring now in the gorge, and this plant blooms even before the spring. I consider skunk cabbage, and this is one of Susan Austin Roth's beautiful photographs. I consider skunk cabbage one of the wonders of the world. It looks, that fleshy space looks like meat, it smells like meat, and it attracts pollinators that are attracted to animal carcasses. It can also generate its own heat and grow up through the ice and snow. It's just a remarkable plant. Next slide. And you see these leaves in the winter. These are putty root or Adam and Eve orchid leaves. They form in the late summer or fall. They're there all winter. And then they die back and the orchid blooms in May. We have two orchids that have followed this pattern in the Potomac Gorge. Next slide. Okay, so this is what's happening now. As I mentioned, it is spring in the gorge. The spring peepers are peeping on warm nights. I'm sure the wood frogs are too. I haven't heard them yet. And there are trees blooming. They're not spectacular. They don't have spectacular showy flowers, but if you tune into their subtle beauty, you will get so much enjoyment. That's a silver maple in the middle, and there are many silver maples that grow in the floodplain right along the river. There are also many red maples, and they're both blooming now. They're closely related maples. So those are red maple leaves on the left and silver maple flowers on the right. Next slide. And the American elms are blooming in the gorge now too. Susan took these pictures of the buds and bark there on the left. And then I took this picture just last week of this American elm in bloom. The slippery elms are also in bloom. They're not nearly as common, and they like more calcareous soil. And we have a lot of calcareous soil in the gorge, both from some of the underlying rock and then from this rich alluvium that comes down from upriver in the floods. Next slide. I think I'm going to have to speed up a little bit here, huh, Mary? Okay, so I am going to have to speed up a little. I spent too much time in the winter because I'm so snow deprived. When you're walking, if you're walking on the towpath now, you're going to see the silver maples, you're going to see the red maples, the American elms. You're also going to see these winged single-seeded fruits called samaras from last year. And I love these pictures of Susan's. If you look up the trunk of that tree into the crown, you'll see these tulip-shaped configurations of winged seeds. And they light up in the sun, and they look like candelabra. And there's a close-up of them there on the right. Next slide. Okay, so the birding in the gorge is beyond spectacular at any time of year. And I love it most in the wintertime, and mainly because of the diving ducks. These are buffleheads. They're small ducks, they're diving ducks. Look at these beautiful photos by Scott Stafford. We have 3 incredible bird photographers. I'm going to share their work, and they're all friends of Sharon Forsyth, who arranged for them to share these pictures with us tonight. Up in the upper left-hand corner, see the pink feet? They're like bubblegum pink. Those are the male bufflehead feet. And those are 2 males and females flying. And the male, and just to watch the diving ducks in the winter, you know, they're going to go nest way up in Canada or way northern US, but they're here with us in the winter. And if you want to see them, get out and see them now. Next slide. These common mergansers are also diving ducks. That is the male on the left and at the top, and the female on the bottom. Now, most of them do migrate far north, but a few stay here and nest. And Carol Bergman and I had the most amazing experience on a June day last year at Turkey Run. We saw, there you see the mother merganser with the ducklings there. We saw a whole nursery. There were 3 or 4 merganser moms, and we counted a total of 25 ducks. So most of them were the young, and they were out in the river, and they were splashing and skating and diving, and the young ones were playing like puppies. It was really something to see. Next slide. Oh, and the ringneck ducks. This is a photo by Gregory Goff. I just love this photo. These beautiful ducks, my husband and I saw them just a few days ago when we were walking on the river trail. They're called ringneck ducks, but they have this, their most obvious field marking is this white ring around the bill. Aren't they beautiful? Oh, next slide. Diving ducks, those are diving ducks too. And then we have these year-round birds, the bald eagle. What a conservation success story. Ravens are nesting in the gorge now. Double-crested cormorants. Just the birding is incredible. Next slide. And look at this bluebird. This is another Scott Stafford series of photos. Seeing bluebirds in the gorge, it's just, you know, what could warm your heart more than that? And my friend Ann Sturm is with us tonight, and she was a founder of the Bluebird Conservation Society. And I'm sorry, I may not have the exact name of it, but she has been tireless in getting everyone she knows to put up bluebird houses and monitor them. And the bluebirds have come back, and it's just wonderful. Now, the red-headed woodpecker is very rare in the gorge, but there was one hanging around Carderock for several months last year. They love acorns. You can see the bird there in the oak tree. Next slide. And okay, so I was showing you some really dramatic, you know, brightly colored or large birds, but these little birds are so wonderful. The ruby-crowned kinglet and the golden-crowned kinglet, they come to us in the fall. And you'll find them when you walk in the gorge, either in the upland woods or in the floodplain. You'll just find these little birds flitting around. And the brown creeper is such a secretive bird, and it spirals up the tree. It creeps really close to the bark, and you can see the feathers are so camouflaged with the bark. And when it's scrunched against the tree, you'll just see this, like it looks like the bark is moving. So I love seeing all of these birds. Next slide. And I hope this makes my dad happy. My dad is going to be 95 next month, and he is a lifelong birder. I didn't really like getting hauled out of bed early in the morning in April in Vermont. So I switched to plants as my main interest, but my interest in nature comes from my dad. The white-throated sparrow is a beautiful songster, and this is another bird that comes to us in the fall, and it's here through the winter, and then it leaves in the spring. Theodore Roosevelt, as a very young man, described the song as singularly sweet and plaintive, which is perfect. It's just a piercingly beautiful song. Next slide. And we have all of these to look forward to. The spring ephemerals that are so abundant in the gorge. The plant on the right is Harbinger of Spring. It is a plant that is only found in the Potomac River corridor. You know, in our area. You will not find it anywhere else. It came down from the mountains, and there it is, this cute little plant. It's already blooming now. And then the spring beauties are close behind. Next slide. And the Dutchman's breeches and the squirrel corn, I think you can see they look very much like bleeding heart. They're closely related to the bleeding heart. They bloom throughout the gorge in the early spring. Next slide. And I think our floral stars in the gorge in the spring are the Virginia bluebells. And look at these absolute carpets at Turkey Run. Next slide. Okay, so I said spring is here, and here's the proof. I took these pictures 2 days ago. There's the Harbinger of Spring up on the left, and look at the bluebells. They're already in bud. So it's a bit early, and I know a lot of us feel anxious about climate change a lot of the time. I'm writing poetry now, and I'm actually working on a poem about how do you grieve a too early spring? You know, your heart swells with the signs of spring, and then when it's too soon, you worry. I'm trying to put that into a poem. It's a very complicated emotional scenario. Next slide. There are the bluebells on the left, and then when they die back, this wild blue phlox takes over, and it's about the same height as the bluebells. It grows in the floodplain in great profusion, and it's fragrant. And I love it when you've got that muddy smell of the floodplain and then the sweet smell of the wild blue phlox. Next slide. Here's another tale of the Potomac River's power. These are yellow trout lilies, which are common in our area. And there's the rare white trout lily. I looked in Flora of Virginia. It said you will only find it in the Potomac River in Virginia. I think I read that right. Next slide. If not exactly, it was close. There's the Jack in the Pulpit and the May apple. Huh?
Love Jack in the Pulpit.
Love Jack in the Pulpit. Love it. Next slide. So the Potomac Heritage Trail takes you under the Beltway, under the American Legion Bridge, which is quite an experience. I mean, look at the bridge. I enjoyed that walk, and I saw several great blue herons, lots of wood ducks and common mergansers. It's a beautiful stretch of the river. And now every time I cross the gorge on the Beltway, it's like I'm in the gorge, and I see all the ghost trees. Next slide. Oh gosh, I'm running so late here. Okay, so this is the Billy Goat Trail, section A in early spring. This is looking into Mather Gorge on the Maryland side from the Billy Goat Trail. Next slide. And this is a delicate little flower that blooms along the Billy Goat Trail, the lyre-leaved rock cress and more Virginia bluebells. Next slide. And the shad, this tree is called shadbush or serviceberry. And the name shadbush refers to the fact that it blooms when the shad is running in the river. There's also a rare shad, the Nantucket shad. The name tells you it's not a Maryland plant, but it's blooming in the gorge. Next slide. We have beavers. This is along the towpath, right near Old Anglers. You can see somebody's protected that tree that's right next to the towpath. There are beaver dams, and there are 2 beaver dens built into the bank there. Next slide. I also saw lots of signs of beavers at Turkey Run. This is Stephanie Mason. She is a senior naturalist for Nature Forward, formerly ANS. And if you can get on one of her walks, she leads a lot of walks along the towpath, in the gorge, other parts of the gorge. Get on one of her walks. She is the most well-rounded naturalist I know. She knows the birds, she knows the frogs, she knows the snakes, she knows all the plants. She's just wonderful. And that jacket she wears, not only does she pull out field guides from every single pocket, she also occasionally will pull out some chocolate bark with apricots in it. That's her magic jacket. Next slide. Here's the Potomac Gorge in early spring, another one of Susan's beautiful pictures. Next slide. And blooming early in the spring is the pawpaw, which is also the host plant for the zebra swallowtail butterfly. So when you're walking along the towpath and you see the pawpaws, the butterflies are flitting among them. Next slide. And the towpath in April is just spectacular with our flowering dogwoods, our red buds. Next slide. And this is how I first came to Sycamore Island. I was walking in Rock Creek Park and I was looking at bloodroot in bloom last spring. And this guy walked by behind me, this, very fit, kind of wiry guy walked behind me and he just kind of leaned over and he said, "Oh, the bloodroot is in bloom." And I thought, who the heck knows bloodroot? And I just had to know who he was and how he knew the bloodroot. And we started talking and I found out that he had been the caretaker at Sycamore Island for almost 20 years. And so he took me to the island in spring. He said, "You have to see it when the bluebells are blooming." And the whole island end to end is Virginia bluebells. That's Joe with the flood gauge up in the upper left. There's Doug Dupin again, working the ferry. And then Joe is setting up his scope there in the right-hand picture. Next slide. This is the tulip tree when it blooms. It's actually in the magnolia family. Next slide. And last spring we had a flood. And right before the flood, I got COVID. And my daughter was worried. My daughter Sophie was worried that I was going to, in my weekend state, slip on a rock and fall into the floodwaters. So she came down to take care of me and to go to the gorge with me. And we had this amazing day. Look at the river. That is Great Falls. It's almost horizontal. Next slide. And this just pulled at our heartstrings. This is a tiny baby snapping turtle that was just above the floodwaters. And I would love to know that little turtle's story. There was nothing we could do for it. We just had to hope but that little turtle was going to be okay. It was up above the floodwaters, as I said. So I hope it was okay. Next slide. The fringe trees were blooming that day. They're very fragrant. They bloom on Olmsted Island. I need to do a little powwow now with Hedrick and Mary and Melissa about the time, because I'm not going to finish at 7 if I go through all my, at 7 if I go through all my slides. What do you want me to do? Should I go a little longer?
I would love for you to go a little longer. Let's take a break now and see if people have questions.
Okay, that sounds good.
And then we can stay with the people who would like to stay a little longer.
That sounds like a great plan. I love it.
So we already have a few thoughts. Tom Patton says, "I've worn out a lot of boots in our region, but you inspire me to wear out many more." Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And Melanie, 2 observations, and certainly we can see if some people are putting questions. At the start of your talk, you sort of talked about, once you cross on the Olmsted Island, everything sort of washes away. And I've had a very busy week already, which is hard to believe. But just hearing these stories and seeing the images of the birds and the plants has totally relaxed me. And I think it's wonderful that your father's on, and it looks like maybe your mom and a brother. So they're sort of leaning in. And so offline, you and I, Melanie, apparently need to compare notes about how our fathers would drag us out. Mine was about this time of year on a Saturday to go look for red-winged blackbirds in what we call the swamp. But hats off to your father for instilling, and probably your mother as well, for instilling such a love of wilderness. And we're so honored and pleased that they were able to plug in, because we decided to do this by Zoom rather than in person.
Oh, thank you so much, Hedrick. That is so sweet. I loved everything you shared. And I have to say, the lady with my dad is not my mom. She passed away over 5 years ago. She also instilled a love of nature in me. Her favorite flower was the trailing arbutus, which was that plant I showed you at Difficult Run. The woman with my dad, Mike Choukas, is Barbara Hall, his lady friend, who is absolutely wonderful. And my brother Mike and my sister Ellie and her husband are also on. And I think my son Jesse and maybe my daughter Sophie. So it's very nice to have family with us. Are there
Well,
other questions?
I don't see other questions, except you do have a cheer to keep talking about the gorge for hours. We won't take hours, but why don't you go through a few more slides and then come to a natural ending spot.
Okay, that's great. I just see a note from my son saying, I'm here. Hi, Jesse. He's in Nashville. Thank you, Jess. Okay, so we'll go through some more and give me the hook if you need to. We could always do this again. Okay, next slide. Okay, whoops, go back to the one right before this. Yes, okay. So here is Georgia Chafee Nasikas. I think she's looking at a great blue heron flying down the river, flying down Mather Gorge to the mouth of Difficult Run. And look at how happy she is there, snuggled into the rocks, watching birds. That was a wonderful day. We were with Betsy Lovejoy and Margaret Rattano. We walked from Tom Lovejoy's home. I know many of you know and admire Tom Lovejoy, and he lived in the gorge. He lived at Drover's Rest. And after he died, Betsy invited us to come to Drover's Rest and walk down into the gorge from there. And it was just a wonderful day in May. And I have another picture from that walk. The next picture. Next. There's Georgia and Margaret. And look at that. I mean, would you think that if you saw this picture, would you say, oh, that's right outside of Washington, D.C.? Next slide. Let's see, I'm looking at the chat. Oh, that was Margaret. That was Margaret. Thank you, Margaret. Okay, so I'm going to propose that this plant become the official plant of the Potomac Gorge. This is the moss phlox. Look at the way it's springing right out of the rocks. It just needs a little bit of soil to get purchased, and it just grows right out of the rocks. And I think it should be our official wildflower of the Potomac Gorge. That's my little proposal for the evening. Next slide. And the wild azalea, the pinkster bloom azalea, blooms in May. It was blooming that day. We walked from Drover's Rest. And I love this is something that Theodore Roosevelt, I'm not supposed to call him Teddy. He didn't like to be called Teddy. He wrote to his son Kermit when he was president. He wrote, the azalea, I always rather liked its old New York Dutch name of pinkster, is in bloom, and the woods are beautiful. He spent, as president, he got out into the gorge and into Rock Creek Park as much as he could. Next slide. And the mountain laurel blooms after the azalea, the mountain laurel blooms. And this is the mountain laurel at Difficult Run. This is my friend, Linda Rubenstein. Our sons, my son, Jesse, and her son, Alex, have been buddies since they were in kindergarten. And we reconnected recently and started walking in the gorge together. And that's a beautiful close-up photo of the mountain laurel flower that Linda took. And a nice hike to do is to walk down along Difficult Run, next slide, and then you get onto the Ridge Trail and then the River Trail in Great Falls Park, and you go out to this landmark that I had never heard of, Cow Hoof Rock. Cow Hoof Rock should be a famous destination. It's shaped like a cleft hoof, and it's out over Mather Gorge, and the view into the gorge from there is entirely pristine. You don't see any signs of human anything. It's incredible. And you can make a loop. You can go down along Difficult Run and then make a loop to Cow Hoof Rock and then go back on the carriage road to Difficult Run. Or you can get to Cow Hoof Rock from Great Falls, the national park in Virginia. Next slide. Okay, so I think my biggest adventure this year was another adventure with Joe Haig. We paddled from, he has a canoe, and we put in at Riverbend Park, and we paddled down to Conn Island, which is above Great Falls. And there's this massive rookery. It's great blue herons, double-crested cormorants, and great egrets, all roosting in the trees, nesting in the trees, and all of their squawking young, with the parents flying in from every direction. And the squawking young, it was such an experience to paddle around this island. Next slide. And Joe's the one I met with the bloodroot. He's also known as Towpath Joe. There's Towpath Joe. I think he's holding a feather in that picture. And you can see the herons flying in. I didn't get any really good pictures that day, not being, I didn't have a long lens or anything, but it was just magnificent. Next slide. Summer at the falls, on a hot day, you go there, that river is just so cooling and soothing, especially if you get some spray flying up from the rapids. Next slide. Homestead Island in the summer has, it's lush and beautiful with lots of wildflowers. Those are woodland sunflowers blooming. Next slide. And then one of my favorite things to do in the gorge in the summer is to rent a boat at Fletcher's Boathouse and paddle up to Chain Bridge. I did that in a morning in late August, and I saw all of these wildflowers. The wildflower up on the right, the halberd-leaved rose mallow, blooms all along both banks of the river. And I saw many other wildflowers that day as well. Next slide. And then Linda Rubenstein took these beautiful pictures at Scott's Run Nature Preserve in the summer. And Scott's Run is an incredibly diverse place for plants. It's a famous spot for, incredible diversity of plants, including flowering plants. And there's a halberd-leaved rose mallow again, and there a beautiful great blue heron down on the lower right. And Scott's Run all thawed out, no icicles there. Next slide. And Sharon Forsyth, who is amazing, she's an amazing naturalist, and she is studying dragonflies and damselflies, and she shared these photos with us. The damselfly down in the lower left and the two dragonflies at the top, and those are her IDs. Thank you, Sharon. Next slide. In the late summer and fall, all kinds of flowers bloom in the gorge. Many of them are in the aster or daisy family, including the goldenrods and the asters and the sunflowers, the eupatoriums, mist flower, white snake root. It's just, there's something blooming almost all year in the gorge, if you count the skunk cabbage, which of course I do. Next slide.
Melanie?
Yes.
I'm aware that our Zoom time will be coming to a close soon. So I think with the anticipation of a beautiful spring, a fantastic summer, we will have our appetites whet for the beautiful fall as well.
Okay,
and come back to this at another time.
Can we just go to my last 3 slides? Just flip through. Yeah, okay, good. Fall in the gorge. Theodore Roosevelt Island, it is the lower end of the gorge, and the river is tidal there. This is Grandmother Sycamore, who, if you pull into the parking lot at Theodore Roosevelt Island, you're going to see this sycamore tree. It's amazing. Next slide. And I just want to share this quote very quickly. It is an incalculable added pleasure to anyone's sum of happiness if he or she grows to know, even slightly and imperfectly, how to read and enjoy the wonder book of nature. And there's just one more slide, I think. 2 more. We protect what we love. Can we just go back to that message? We protect what we love. Okay, last slide.
Yeah.
Last slide. I just want to thank all of you and Potomac Conservancy and all of your friends and associates and tireless stewards of the Potomac River and these amazing photographers. Look at Gregory Goff's little bluebird there and the common merganser. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Melanie. What an amazing tour of our natural wonders that are right here outside our door practically.